Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm your host, Matt Bennett. Each episode we talk about the research and practical aspects of the trauma informed movement. This podcast is not designed to replace mental health services. If you feel uncomfortable or triggered by our discussion, please consider seeking your own trauma treatment. In no way is seeking treatment an admission of weakness. It is a chance to build resiliency and experience post-traumatic growth. You can find show notes, resources, and more at traumainformedlens.org. Welcome, friends, to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I am Matt. I'm here today with Nathan Gerbrandt, and we are going to talk trauma-informed workplaces. Audience knows I love this topic. Nathan has just written a book that is titled and lives up to that title, The Little Book About Trauma-Informed Workplaces. And it is a great, concise, I wouldn't even say overview. I would say it gives you sort of what you need to get thinking about this important topic. And one of the things that I think, we really need as we talk about trauma-informed care, one of the things I loved seeing your book, Nathan, was we've got to think about, are we creating healthy work environments for staff to deliver trauma-informed care? And it's been a big passion of mine for about 2 decades now, thinking about this topic. So I am really thrilled to have Nathan as a guest. Nathan, why don't you give yourself introduction? And I got some good questions for you, but let's introduce yourself and a little bit about your work, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Matt. Well, and I have to start off by saying it's an honor to be here. It's great to meet you, just to see and put the voice and to the face here. I'm seeing you visually as well through video, and so that's been great. I've been listening to the podcast for a number of years now, and so yeah, thanks. It's an honor to be here and be part of this journey here with you. My name's Nathan Gerbrandt. I've been a social worker in Manitoba here, Canada, for the last 15-20 years, working with people in conflict with the law, high levels of complex trauma, but then also as I moved up in my career, more from the organizational stands, working with employees, supervising and managing. And then now I've transitioned to Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute, CTRI, a little bit of a mouthful there. And so I'm the managing director here. And so we work with a team of people to bring what we hope are inspiring learning, training, in an accessible way to people across Canada, across North America, across Turtle Island. And now with the crazy spin-offs of the pandemic, we're doing a lot more virtual stuff. And we had people from Germany in my last training, which was cool. I mean, I really value that connection piece and hearing their stories. And so it's a long journey of social worker to educator to manager to considering workplaces and author now too with this book. So it's been an exciting ride, and I'm very happy to be talking about trauma-informed workplaces now.
Oh, hold the book up. You got it in your hands. Hold it up for those on video. There it is.
As you say, it's a little book. We aim to keep integral, or the integrity of the title. It's a little book of trauma-informed workplaces. It's only about 60 pages. Takes about 30 minutes to read.
Yes, and it's packed with good stuff. So let's start out with a simple question, kind of. It's simple to word, maybe a little bit more difficult to answer. But when you say trauma-informed workplace, tell me what that means.
Good. Okay. Interesting. We wrote, and so we wrote the majority of the book during sort of our lockdown period of pandemic, and we got probably halfway through putting together the nuts and bolts of the principles. And then we met as a team of authors. There's 3 of us. I give credit to Randy Grieser and Vicki Ensign and myself co-authored it. And we stopped and realized, hey, we don't even have a definition here. What are we actually talking about? So we did some, research and looking at what else is out there. There's no clear, common understanding of what it means to have trauma-informed care, trauma-informed approaches, or trauma-informed workplaces. So we kind of let's try and kind of this really complex beast, and let's put our writing to it. And so this is what we came up with. And we have it in here. Trauma-informed workplaces are workplaces that understand the presence of trauma. They acknowledge the role trauma can play in a person's life, and they promote an environment that supports the individual and the collective well-being of everyone. So, I mean, what we really, I think, comes out of that definition is that back and forth between sort of the big and the small, the individual and the collective. And so on that, and I think that's a theme that kind of comes out anytime I talk about trauma, when we teach on it, and this book is ourselves, our individual actions, our history, locating ourselves, but then also that ripple effect, that collective, our culture of a workplace. And so we always need to keep both of those in mind as we think about trauma-informed places and trauma-informed actions.
Awesome. So why should we care about it? Well, why is this important? So as you, one of the things I love about writing books is things kind of pop out in a different way. And so obviously this was important enough for you and your thinking to put it down in a book. And I just kind of wonder, why do you see this as an important thing for those on this journey to provide trauma-informed care, or just workplaces in general to really look at this idea of becoming a trauma-informed workplace?
Well, interesting you say that why. I mean, that's another storyline in the writing of this book, but then also as it relates to us as an organization. And I mean, we wrote this book very much based on our vision for the future. So the why is again that really big piece. And our vision for the future is a future where everyone is trauma informed. And so that's when we want to think aspiration. We want to provide hope within that. We want to be looking to the future. And I mean, admittedly, maybe some might think that's, pie in the sky, and that's like, well, okay, great, okay, but what do we do now?
Yeah.
But I like the why of why we wrote the book and why workplaces are so crucial to that end. And I think this last year, again, the pandemic has offered some lessons for us in the importance of the why and the practicality. It's tying the big and the goal to the practicality, because what have we all learned this last year? I mean, the public health messages around physical distancing, washing your hands, wearing a mask, all these practical kind of things that we can kind of take on to prevent the spread of a virus. And I think very much in the same way, we are trying to adopt trauma-informed care principles to protect those that are vulnerable to trauma, to not re-traumatize people. And so we don't need to be infectious disease specialists to engage in that practice, to adopt those sort of practical approaches. And I think in that same way, this book is not about creating therapists or trauma specialists, even, if you will. This book is about finding a way to bring practical strategies to how we set up our policies, how we set up our environments in our workplace, how we think about empathy and curiosity in our relationships. And so I think the ripple effects of protection around public health can be the same positive ripple effects around protecting people from the spread of trauma, because trauma can get transferred through our emotions.
Yeah.
And I come back to workplaces so much because I think workplaces, I mean, where do you spend most of your time in a day? I mean, you're sleeping 7-8 hours a day, hopefully. A little time with your family, but you're in your work. You're in your site, you're connecting with your colleagues 7-8 hours a day, right? That's where we have I think that lead into structure, to interaction. We can practice these things. We can think about culture, workplace culture. And not just, I mean, we work with social service groups, we work with a lot of medical, a lot of people who are working directly with frontline trauma, vulnerable kind of people with vulnerable kind of backstories. But this is for everybody. Because of the pervasiveness of trauma, whether you're a manager, whether you're a director, whether you're a janitor, whether you're tech staff, you're in the world. You're working with colleagues that will have been exposed to trauma, and will have that in their interactions, and it will come up in how we engage in our days. And so I think that's the end. That's how we sort of bring about a world where everyone is trauma informed.
Awesome. And I love this because one of the things I've seen, I've been doing a lot of work and sort of have, those professional connections that quickly become friends, doing a lot of great work in employment, especially in, I think our problem might be a little worse than yours with homelessness right now, but trying to help as part of getting people to live the life that they want, that they desire. Obviously, while housing, healthcare, employment's a big part of that. And one of the things that they're hitting up against is these are some great trauma-informed advocates. I've been working with some of these organizations for several years now, just great people. One of the issues, though, is that when even though they're really trauma-informed in their approach, as soon as they connect folks into more traditional business workplaces, they're finding that the approaches of, I guess, if we could just say typical management in the hospitality and other sort of entry-level jobs is really re-triggering, and that it's really a lot of times difficult to keep people employed, because while they sort of can thrive in these trauma-informed environments, the transition into non-trauma informed environments usually creates barriers for them to be successful. So I love your scope of looking at this. Yeah, probably starting with us in the helping and healing professions, but quickly looking beyond as well.
Yeah, well, and that's very, very applicable. This is not just for the helping professions. This is as important, if not more important. I mean, because I think, as you say, so much about the helping professions that people have come through, education degrees, social work, that's sort of baked into some of the education. And so when we train this, what I like about it is we have 5 principles. Promoting awareness is number 1. We don't have to spend all our time there. We have 4 other principles. If we are already kind of speaking the language of trauma, now we need to think maybe more about attitudes or choice or safety in those other areas. And in my experience, as I work so much with the helping professions, the reality of vicarious trauma is so real. That personal wellness piece, that's a whole integral part of this process. And so whether you're in that sphere, or if you're not, you're in the hospitality, you say you're in the industry, you're working with machines, we need the awareness too, but we don't actually have to. And this is our approach too. The word trauma is not essential to being trauma informed. If you're not familiar with it, that's okay. There are other ways of bringing in these attitudes, this approach. And I mean, and just as an example, so I work for CTRI. We have a partner division called Achieve Center for Leadership. They provide training for the corporate world, the government, the non-helping professionals, if you will. So it's a lot of leadership, workplace culture. Our mission in the Achieve vision is everyone should be able to like where they work. And so I think that's a beautiful trauma-informed mission statement. It doesn't say trauma, but it's about, it gets at what do we get value at from our workplaces, and we like it there. And it's not like I have to like every task I do. I don't. Frankly, there are some things about my job I'd rather not do. But it's a bit of a balance, and the percentages are there. But in our research we've done, the social engagement is just paramount. If I have peers at my workplace that I have camaraderie with, I will want to be around those people. If I have a leader that trusts me, that I can go to, that I got a first name basis with, we can talk about my kids, we can talk about other things. Then when I'm struggling with something, I might be worried about some mental health things, I have somebody in a level of authority, that's huge. And so those are sort of the factors that kind of increase social engagement. And obviously workplaces need to foster that. So particularly, I mean, I think now during the pandemic, we're a little more disconnected, right? Workplaces who want to bring trauma-informed principles need to think about that employee social engagement. How are we still managing to create that connection so that peers can rub shoulders? And leadership doesn't have to do it all. We all have a role in that, but we have to foster environments and be intentional about it, more so now even than ever. And so yeah, it stretches beyond the clinical, the helping professions to the corporate, you name it. It's everybody has a role and responsibility. And so that's what we wrote this book, is to cross over.
Yeah, and I love that, because my first kind of step outside the kind of the social work, social service arena, which I've spent most of my career, was in, and I worked in these environments, but the next step in my at least training evolution was to go into schools. And the interesting thing that is, I started to apply the research, because basically, if you were on my caseload as either a therapist or a case manager, you had complex trauma. Like I know statistically, not everybody in the housing systems and the child welfare systems here have it, but my caseload was 100% in the systems that I worked with. So walking into the schools for the first time, that there was a sense, and this is, to relate this to the workplace that you're talking about, is like that there's this sense, well, even though statistically by the time people graduate in the upper grades, yeah, the majority of people walking into our high schools here, we know just by the data, have experienced some trauma in their life. So I could come in and say, this isn't like 4 kids walking through the door. This is the majority by the time graduation happens. The majority of youth walking across the stage to get their diploma, it's the majority of them at that point. But the really exciting thing, I think, about the trauma movement and where it was really easy to bring this into education was, we're almost talking about, I'd love to get your opinion on this, maybe from a more generalized perspective in your thinking. We're talking about a neurobiologically friendly environment. And that gets a little nerdy in language, but it's like, you don't have to choose when you're creating a classroom, a trauma sensitive classroom, whether it's you're benefiting population A or population B, things like mindfulness, things like, as you mentioned, trust. I know we'll get to psychological, physical safety as well with that. All those things in some ways raises all the boats up. And I wonder if you've, kind of thought about that from the more generalized workplace setting, because I haven't kind of transitioned a whole lot out of kind of the helping and healing arena that I'm in. But I'd love to just get your, at least general thoughts on, if you're talking to maybe a business owner, how do you kind of sell that? Yeah, you've got folks, we know probably the majority of your workforce actually have experienced trauma, but it's also good for folks that might not be struggling with that right now.
So thinking about, you're asking about, less of the social service, the helping professions, how the more business oriented, how do they kind of bring that lens to the physical space maybe, or, within this, the helping professions, I don't see actually a radical difference in terms of the principles are still there as it relates to thinking about the experience of that other. And so I think that's maybe the lens that I think comes as a social worker or as a therapist. You're kind of really focusing on that helping kind of role. And so maybe that, forgive me, but maybe that comes more natural because that's part of the relationship. There are minefields there too, I think, because we think we control and we think we know the answer. We don't, we have an agenda that we don't always set down. And I think that there are challenges there. But I think that same principle, maybe this is where I think some of the professions that don't work within the helping sphere with vulnerable people as much can take a lesson from that a little bit, is thinking about that experience of the other, wondering what's going on. And so we don't, again, I say, be a therapist, but we need to appreciate and stop for a minute if we experience, say, behavior that we don't understand. And just stop and not, and so this is where that second principle we have on shift judgment, I think, is so crucial and so difficult. In that, how do we, because this, I think it's naturally baked into some of our beings, this defensiveness that we kind of like, oh, what's going on there? And why did they do that? And like, oh, geez, I don't want to work with that person. Like, I think we have some of these natural responses, and how can we stop and just go, huh? And so bringing in sort of an inquisitive curiosity. So I think there's a bit of that on the social engagement and interactional piece that crosses over regardless of your industry. And first and foremost, I think if we are providing safety through relationships, through those interactions, our spaces will be safe. They are secondary. We, the people, are the most important pieces within the space to create safe environments. As you speak about the school, schools do tremendous jobs with the visuals and the classrooms and the movement. And I have utmost respect for my teacher colleagues and how they have put so much attention to those details. And I think there's lots to be learned there. But first and foremost, we as people need to be safe in our interactions. It's interesting. We do one thing I recommend in this book is keeping in line with that experience is something I've heard called customer journey mapping. I don't know if you know about that, or client journey mapping is it's an exercise I often do when I'm training. Is I have people think through the experience. For example, if you're a manager of your of a new staff getting hired, and then physically walking into, your waiting area. They're waiting for their, their first day on the job. Who are they talking to? What kind of stress level are they having? Is it clear, the signage? What they're dumped a policy binder. What do they do with that, right? And just thinking through all the touch points and just being empathic, imagining what would that experience be like? What questions should we be considering? What need points? What pain points? And I think we can then get at it, either the physical, the psychological, the relational kind of safety needs that we all have within each of those. And maybe we want some challenge, right? Like stress is not all bad. So, but let's be thoughtful when a person is ready for that they can kind of, oh, this is the test, right? Because we have to have those things. We need those markers. We need to be pushing people at the same time. And I think that's where people will be at their best, when they can be pushed and challenged within safe environments. So
awesome. Well, let's talk about that first principle that you mentioned with awareness. Talk to me about that. Obviously, trauma informed. Sometimes I just think those words come out of our mouth without kind of thinking about what it means. But obviously awareness is a part of that. But, talk to me about awareness. You kind of put that as basically the first principle in the book. So tell us about why that's so important, and what are some of the aspects of awareness in what you see as a trauma-informed workplace.
Good. No, I think that's when we introduce the book, we actually start with a section on what is trauma. I think it's important to lay the groundwork there first around sort of some of that common language. And I often struggle with, well, we want to do that, but we first need to have awareness. And is it the same thing? Well, no, it's different actually, because promoting awareness is about how do we within our workplaces provide that education. So it's actually the providing of it. It's talking about it. It's making sure, for example, where we work, when we have our vision statement of a future where everyone is trauma informed. And so when we have our meetings, we have staff meetings once a month, we tag a different staff member every month to kind of do a short little opening around how their work, their interactions with clients, how that ties back to the vision. So we have a little story. And so promoting awareness is about, I think, keeping the language alive, keeping staff comfortable talking about it. I think it's destigmatizing trauma. So it's a bit about getting that culture once there is that trauma 101 already. But maybe you just need basic training. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say we are a training organization. We do training, a full day, a webinar. We have articles, blogs, tons of free stuff. We try and make things very accessible. Like I think starting with some of that lunch and learns, which are often, affordable to free. Like I think that's integral, but it's the first step. You don't do that on the side. It's like, okay, check that box. It's about now carrying that through. And so you got to report back to your team meeting on what you learned and how does that apply. So that's always essential to any time we're trying to do training, keeping it alive.
What would you say some of those key messages as you look, I always think about that in my trainings as well, is like, what are knowing that if I do a good job, especially for, my full day trainings have turned into 3-hour Zooms, because I'm not sure about you. I don't know how to do over 3 hours, just for my own mental health and exhaustion, but also to keep people engaged. I figure if you're engaged an hour at the end of hour 3, I've done my work, but I, in this format in some ways too, as you go back more to PowerPoint and, small groups are kind of in breakout groups in Zoom, and there's not some of that fun back and forth of in person. It does, I always humble myself is I love everybody to remember 100% of what I tell them. But hey, if I do a really good job, you might remember 3 or 4 things that were messages in my training 6 months from now, maybe 3 a year from now. And those are so much in long-term memory, you forget that I even told you that. And I did my job. You may even forget about me, but hey, it stuck with you. And, a job decently done on my end. So I wonder, as we talk about awareness, let's say you go into an organization, because everybody's all over the place nowadays, that is new to this, that may not have, even though they might be doing helping, healing, educational, that sort of work, but they haven't been trained on this. What are some of those kind of key aspects? And we're probably maybe leading into of your principles here, but what are some of the key, what are those 4 or 5 things that you really want folks to take away to ensure there's at least that foundation of awareness to move forward?
Well, no, I mean, it's fair points that there's always the risk of it, that parachute, it happens on the day, and then, you go back to your regular life, right? And yeah, we as humans, our capacity is only so great. And so what I really like about, I think, our approach is focusing on the practical, the tangible. And so, yes, there's the educational kind of piece, but what's gonna create that thread that's gonna continue, that's gonna be, 6 months from now or 2 months from now, we're gonna have someone else ask that question. So one thing well, two points maybe that I'll make particularly here is I think doing an assessment too. Like you and I, everybody, we've got our vision on like how serious this is, what is my take on it, and my algorithm for what's going on with myself and my family and my workplace. And I mean, frankly, those are just anecdotal, right? Like we have our blinders on, we have our biases that will impact that. So I think assessment, getting a benchmark. And so yeah, we need to do that kind of test. And I mean, I referenced that client journey mapping. I mean, I think well, I'll often have people just physically make that map, like draw it out, make it, either physically or, like an Excel drop-down menu kind of thing, bring it back, have a team meeting around it, put it up on the wall. Next time you orient staff, you bring someone in, okay, this is what we thought. These are the important things as it relates to customer service, right? So you have something that kind of continues on. And I think that assessment gives you that marker in time. I mean, I would say that then you also got to schedule 6 months from now, you got to do another one. And I mean, I'll say we have assessment tools we'll send you. It's $20 where we've got a facilitator's guide that you can kind of fill it out, talk about it, get a marker, get a score even. We do it on our website where you can do for free, and we'll give you an 8-page custom response. And so, do something that lodges this point in time our thinking. Okay. I would also say you need a champion. Somehow you've got to make this formal within your workplace. So whether you're creating a trauma-informed committee that has this as their role, you've got a person that's okay, they've been assigned this. And I think with that often means, okay, we're giving you permission to be outside, to offer feedback, to offer guidance, to offer insight outside of what's going on. So this isn't personal. But as you bring this lens, sometimes, well, you're going to challenge leadership. You're going to say, hey, that thing that we've been doing for so long, I don't think it's trauma informed. I think actually there's a ripple effect that some people might be offended by it. There's a microaggression. We have to consider that. So it's not me being personal, because there's often that risk that when you get that kind of calling attention to something, you're going to get defensive within an organization, or it's personal. So I think giving that permission, having that champion, that will then have it as their role. Okay, 6 months from now, you got to follow up in some way. So I think those are kind of crucial. I mean, we go into more detail. We have several sections under promoting awareness around, how do we consider meetings? How do we consider hiring and the lens within the questions? Is that part of our hiring process that we ask that? Or do we expect people to, when they come on the bus, they have that trauma awareness before they come on the bus, or once they're on the bus, then that's part of the orientation. So the HR needs to think through some of those kind of steps and build that into policy.
Well, let me, you're just throwing red meat out to me, my friend. So I can't, because like I said, I have such an interest in this. So hiring is one of my, and it's interesting. I'm a big Jim Collins, Good to Great. I've got that business side of my brain as well that I get to put the hat on every once in a while. And Jim Collins talks about fit. And, it's been a really interesting thing as I've thought about this topic. One is, how do you assess if the person that you're interviewing is going to be a good fit within, as Jim Collins talks about, and I'm a big Gallup 12 guy too. So looking for maybe attributes that you sort of need, someone who will, and I'm trying to move away from fit because, I'd love to ask you a follow-up question about that, but trying to find the right interview questions. Is this going to be, or could become, a trauma-informed worker, for lack of a better word. I'm stumbling maybe a little bit, but how would you suggest? I'm an organization. I go through your maybe 101 training, if I could call it that. I'm all excited. I've got an interview coming up in a couple hours. How do I do interviewing of new staff from a trauma-informed perspective? What would be some of the maybe suggestions or even strategies you might have for that?
Well, I'm going to reflect on one question. I know we've been very intentional. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways I think I can respond here. I mean, you can educate, you can provide people.
Yeah.
I don't want to rule people out just because they don't have a backstory or a background in this. And it's not like when we hire our video projects person that they need to understand the lingo and the terminology. And so I'd be very cautious to ask, what's your definition of trauma-informed care? Or what's your I would stay away from that kind of stuff, because I think we need to appreciate that may not be there, might not be present, and what's the job that they're being hired for. But what we will ask is, often questions around, say you've screwed up.
Yeah.
Say, you've let somebody down in some way, maybe a client, maybe it's somebody really important. What do you do and how do you feel? And sort of getting at kind of the empathic kind of pieces, because I mean, frankly, I think that's probably the hardest thing to teach and train. And so we want to get at people that are compassionate and are curious and are honest with their emotions. I mean, I think those are some of the pieces that we will actually ask, and we will look for, I feel bad. I want to work very hard to rectify this. Maybe it's not my problem, but I want to contribute to the team. So you see some of those threads coming out around being a team player as well too, and not, because part of trauma-informed, I think, lens too is struggling with some of that individualistic kind of selfish kind of pieces towards, yes, I'm part of something bigger than myself, and we see those that sort of natural instincts around that'll come out in answering those questions. I always think hiring is, I mean, there's a give and take there too, because as an organization, and maybe this is taking the question a little further than what you were asking, but I mean, I think it's brilliant too, and so crucial when you have someone coming on to your organization, they're fresh.
Yeah.
The challenge of an organization too is we get this group thing. We have this culture, and this is the way we do things.
Yeah.
Every time you bring someone new, I think we're very well served when we empower them to speak their mind, to not just like, okay, well, this is how we do it, and then now you need to do it that way.
Yeah. But
we've got a few months before they get indoctrinated into the system, and we lose that fresh eyes. So it's also empowering them too to keep who they are. We don't all have to think the same. I think we want to approach an attitude that's collective, but our ideas and fresh outlook, it's got to be different, right? That's a whole part of the trauma-informed process. I think that there's a different pacing that will all come to this, and being appreciative of that difference is one of those integral nuances, I think, to becoming trauma-informed.
Yeah, and that was like the thing I'm really struggling with. Because again, I'm just sort of, if Jim Collins says it, it's gospel. I just love that the dude researched leadership in a way like nobody really has before, but I love what you said, because it really helps me, because the fit concept, on one hand, I get, you're looking for a good fitting. He talks about these organizations with these almost religious sort of evangelical sort of in a secular way, but cultures that you either fit or you're kicked out right away. And I had actually some great people in one of my trainings kind of challenge me on that. One, here in the United States, fit is being co-opted like a lot of other things by white nationalists, and I want to make sure that not using that language when at all possible in my trainings. But the other thing that they really got me thinking about is, if you're going to have that language about fit into culture, you got to keep that diversity as well. And that's where I think looking for this middle ground from the kind of leadership hiring perspective is, and I think it's such a fine line. And being a good interviewer, I've gotten jobs I've had no business getting in my life. So part of this is like, I think what's hard is you can have a great interview person, and sometimes I can answer all your questions right, but there's somebody coming in that may bore you a little bit, but has probably better qualifications. So but it's trying to like, okay, what are our values, and then because for me, it's trying to, in some ways, dig to that philosophy. If like, for example, if we're hiring somebody for a housing program, why do you think people struggle with homelessness? Well, they're lazy and they're unmotivated.
Mhm.
Do I want to train that out of you? Probably not, but I love your point too. And I think I want that message to be clear is, you don't have to come in and give me a lecture about trauma-informed care to get hired as well. So I kind of wonder, do you have any, or have developed kind of any favorite kind of questions around, sort of helping people kind of get maybe to their philosophical, that this is somebody, hey, we can train kind of piece. It's kind of a question I always love to ask everybody. Do you have kind of a favorite interview question, or heard something from maybe an organization you work with that you really was impressed with?
Oh boy, now you want something specific here for a question. I mean,
or just sort of a generalized, you don't have to get word for word, but just as like, just kind of testing the water, so to speak. Is this somebody we can train with knowledge, and they will be a part of our trauma-informed efforts? If there's anything you've sort of seen around that.
Well, I think there's two ways I'll answer this. I mean, first of all, I'll step back even. Before you get to that question, we often do our interviews. We have a multi-stage process, and we'll do a first round with someone, Zoom or virtual, and it's kind of weeding out if you have large numbers. But then we'll have a team, usually 2 or usually 3, so you have a collective of different people from different departments. But before they even get to that stage, before our interview team, they have to know the values.
Awesome.
So you can have the questions, whatever, you can have a brilliant script, but if the people, the forum, the 3, whatever, don't understand it, aren't setting up the room so that's not intimidating, don't know the values so that they can ask the questions about the values and what those values mean. Do we have a collectivist value? Do we have individualistic values? Do we have, values about being receptive to feedback? And so I think organizations need to step back and make sure they know their values. Those are ripe. Those are not just on the wall, but those are communicated within meetings. And so there's a bit of that step back before you get to the forum of now interviewing somebody. So there's that piece. That once that's the case, then I think it's less about the specific questions, and you're going to be hearing and thinking, and you're going to see that. I mean, I think so much the language about how we communicate. What is it? A quarter is only the words, right? I mean, 50% is the body language and the tone and so forth. So I think if we can equip the interview group with that awareness and that lens, then you're off to the races. One question that comes to mind that we use that I think gets to a value that we feel is important, and that's that we are a team, we are a collective, that social engagement, social involvement in our organization is really important. Yeah. And so we will ask, like, do you have friends at work?
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? Like, you don't have to be my best friend. I mean, that's not what we say, but our thinking behind that is that we want people who have seen work as an important part, and they give of themselves more than just filling in all those forms or their formal part of the job, but they're bringing their whole person into it. That makes our workforce or an organization richer when each of us are bringing our culture, our sharing about our culture and our identity, and then we will have diversity, presuming we're also conscious of that. But then we'll get the richness of diversity if people are able to, and they speak to the backstory of them. Yeah, I have friends at work, and we'll just listen into it kind of from how they respond to that. Yeah. Do you have friends in your former, organization you've worked at?
I love that. And it's always the challenge. And I'm somebody who's probably done hundreds, way more interviews than I'd like to. I had to either enjoy it or quit a lot of jobs I did because I was usually starting or growing programs. So I was like, okay, I either got to fall in love with this process or I'm going to drive myself crazy and go back to just doing private practice sort of therapy. So it's like, but it's interesting having done hundreds of them. So sort of what to look for and knowing that a lot of it, and there's a scientific basic, it's your gut. Like it's, I've got my horror stories. Everybody's like, my gut just said something wasn't right. And now we know a lot about, gut being the second brain or primary brain, depending on who you talk to now.
And that's totally the language that we have within here. I mean, our founder and executive or president here speaks a lot from his gut. And so something we'll have on our notes, this is the quantitative stuff, but then the gut said this. What's your feel on the person? I do a lot of interviews of trainers. And so what's our feel on this person representing us?
Yes.
Because they're out in the community, we're not there. There's a lot of trust that has to be given. So it's not the be all, it's not the only thing, but it's a very important piece to that. And you speak about doing lots of interviews, and I also ascribe to that. I think most people can put together a pretty good hour packaged presentation. I mean, I think we have, if we have practiced that and if we've got a little bit of acting chops, we can put that together. So interviewing is very hard. It's difficult. We've made mistakes. We acknowledge that, right? and then though, if we have to let someone go, you still do that in a trauma-informed way.
Talk about that a little bit more, because I think that is sort of the tougher part of this. Like hiring a rock star, sort of the easiest. Because I see, and I'd love to see what you see as well, especially up north there in Canada, is we have this mentality in the United States, and I'm not saying it's universal, but it's been present with way too many organizations, whether I've consulted with them or worked for them, that we hesitate due to potential lawsuits that I rarely ever see really come to the surface of being sued, is we will let a person flounder in a position, somehow just ignoring that somebody who's struggling in their position may not be giving the clients we're serving or patients or students the care that our mission calls us to give it. So, but it's, some of my worst days as a leader has been letting people go. And so I get the challenge of that. I wonder, how do you communicate that to folks? Because I think that's one of the untalked about things in this is, trauma-informed. And trauma-informed care, I often get, and I don't know who's training these folks. It's like, well, our trainer said we can give up our professional boundaries. And I'm like, no, what we heard from the trainer is, trauma-informed environments don't have accountability. And I'm like, no, it's like, and I don't know who's out here saying these things, but I kind of wonder how do you approach that topic? Because I don't think, at least here in the States, we don't do that and I would even say, and I use this word ethically, we'll try to make your life hell. Sometimes this is called supervising people out of a situation. We're going to make your life hell so you quit and we don't have to worry about the other side of this equation if we have to fire you. So I wonder, when you talk about, honesty, when you talk about those sort of things, how does that, when you're talking to leaders, how do you broach this subject about underperforming or staff that may just not be able to adapt to this, your next principle, this kind of shift in awareness, this shift in attitudes that you talk about so well in your book?
No, it's not easy, and it's a challenge one too. And I think if the groundwork isn't laid, it's even more difficult if there isn't a full awareness of what the values are, what the expectations are of the job. Yes, I'm seeing clients. Yes, I'm clocking my hours. Yes, I'm responding to emails. Like, there's the nitty gritty of, like, you can say I'm doing my job, but I think it gets tricky when, and this is where we have come at it from so much that just gets you in the door.
Yeah.
There's certain values that are like, okay, that gets you in the door, But now once you're in the door, now you're on the bus, you're working with this, you need to be receptive to feedback. That's one of our values. You need to be flexible. And so you pitch in where needed. You need to get SHIT done. We need to be productive. I'm looking at my values. We need to embody. We need to embrace sort of the principles that govern what we teach. And we need to be engaged. I said that social engagement. We need to be like actively wanting to be involved in the fullness of our workplace. So those are sort of the 5 key values that we talk about a lot. We share in our meetings. It's on the wall. It's part of our interview process that people know these. Okay, so once that foundation's been laid, then if there are challenges, if it's, you know, the mistakes are made or any of those, usually mistakes are made, we work with that. Okay, we have, you know, education, we shift to how can we be lean, how can we improve the skills, maybe the knowledge, the training isn't there, so we provide that. Those are easy fixes typically. But if there's ever a rub on any of those 5 values, that the receptive to feedback, flexible, engaged, productive, so forth, then we talk about it. Then we need to have a meeting. We actually don't do performance reviews. Anytime there's a discrepancy there, that we talk about it right away. We do like yearly goal setting meetings, so people are always looking forward and what's next, and that's how people get engaged and are productive. But so then our process is we will have multiple, you know, meetings with leadership to see what's going on. What's your experience, right? Where is this a challenge? These are the values. You have this, you know, we know that. What's going on for you? So we'll have multiple of those. You know, there'll be a check-in. We'll need to do that a few times, but when we are rigorous. If there isn't change, we're not seeing the change on that values level. Then you know, we'll talk. There isn't a fit.
Yeah,
you know, and then we'll need to. That won't be a surprise to anybody. We are fortunate. We're a private organization, so we don't have as much of a bureaucratic kind of challenge. I've been in government before and large organizations. I know there's a lot more HR kind of cumbersome threads. But if we've gone through our process and we've been in, you know, had integrity in that, then we'll have that conversation. And then how that looks needs to be trauma informed as well. And so that person needs to have an opportunity to have space to hear that well. So it's done privately. We'll give that person the choice of how they want to leave. Do they want to tell people, or do they want to leave, you know, anonymously? We always book a counseling session for that person that they can have the next day. It's anonymous. We don't know if it's been used or not, but it's available to them too, because the emotional sting is real, regardless of whether this was sort of foreshadowed. And then we'll offer an opportunity for saying goodbye on the terms of the person who's leaving. So just thinking very much through that experience. But as an organization, you have to make those difficult decisions. And if there isn't a fit with those values, then we need to move on. Yeah.
Awesome. So one of the questions I had with the shifting attitudes, you know, there's, you know, I think we've talked a lot in the show about the paradigm shift of what's wrong with you to what's happened to you, and just how powerful that still is. Looking at this, you know, one of the things that is really, I think the big challenge here, you can have a great training, but when you sort of, a week or so after the training is, you know, if you're going to take this seriously, create a group to start reviewing policies, procedures, like you said, that experience of the client or new staff coming in to the organization with that trauma-informed lens, as I like to say. You know, I think that there becomes this point for a lot of organizations where leadership sort of expects people to get on board. And one of the things that I have come to appreciate, and I'd love to hear any strategies you help on either side of this equation, is, you know, Matt comes in and gives us all this great brain stuff, epigen, whatever nerdy stuff Matt throws at us. We have a good day. But one of the things, and I had a challenge when I first saw the adverse childhood experience study, holy bleep, I've been doing a lot of stuff wrong. You know, and I think that we don't sometimes appreciate that, you know, I didn't get taught trauma in even my grad school. I got a lot of student loan debt. Never was I told that their past suffering was going to be accounting for probably 90% or so of problems that I was trying to help people through. So sometimes I think, oh, we'll have a trainer come in to educate, and that will end up in a shift. Especially throw a little burnout or secondary trauma in there. And we know rigidity often replaces flexibility too, which I think is a big issue of this. But how do you help leaders from a trauma-informed perspective kind of not say you better change or you're gone, so to speak? Is, I know you've been doing this sometimes for 20, 30 years in your career this way. We have science to say that may not work as effectively, and we need to rethink our underlying philosophy. From a leadership perspective, how do you help leaders think about kind of holding the space for that shift in attitudes to occur?
No, that's I think the sort of in some ways the $1 million question. I mean, it's hard, right? Like let's not kid ourselves.
I think that's the first thing you say is change, especially from the philosophical level, is not the simplest thing to do.
Well, I think it's one of those things. It takes technique. It takes practice. I played a lot of sports, still do when I can. I mean, it's like saying, okay, I'm going to teach you to do a 3-point shot. Okay, dude, I showed you how to do it. Now you got to do it.
Yes.
Right. Well, how many times are you going to miss if you've never really practiced that? Right. It's about training. It's about practice. It's about repetition. It's about getting some feedback and coaching along the way too. So I'm going to look at my technique and so forth. And part of that, what is that coaching? What does that technique kind of look like? I mean, we frame it in the questions, right? I mean, that's sort of one of the practical pieces, the shifting from sort of what's wrong with you, right, to maybe what's happened to you to kind of make these behaviors make sense. And so that's I think part of that technique is that internal kind of dialogue that we try and shift that paradigm shift or that judgment to and that question of what's maybe happened to make this behavior make sense. What I think about it, it looks at the collective, it considers the backstory, it makes us curious, and it's that shift that's hard, that because we are naturally judgmental, I think, as I said, right? and we want to also make a response that'll make something better. We want to solve. I think, I mean, whether we're leaders or whether we're social service helping professional, and so part of that technical shift, I think, is also, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize saying that right thing, being that, well, I'm going to be that care person for you? You may not need to be that. Like, I think we put a lot of undue pressure on ourselves too. How do we do something to enhance connection is what I come down to. Like, I think this isn't rocket science. It's just like shooting a 3-point shot. It's not rocket science. There's some basic things that you can do, but instead of focusing on making that best, I'm going to be that relational director. That's my leadership style. Well, maybe, but maybe that's not your skill set too. Maybe you need to bring in someone else as well. So part of that is also knowing yourself and your skills as a leader. And this is where we get back to, we have multiple people that can carry these weights too. So knowing I'm going to work in this skill set, I'm going to make sure maybe someone else is going to check in with that person or follow up or delegate out someone else to be more in charge of that kind of stuff. But what makes something, how can we enhance connection within that and that presence, that empathy, that wondering, kind of what's, appreciating that something else might be going on here. And I mean, this is the whole area that I'm kind of playing with as well too, that I think as I write and as I think more too, like as we shift and as we stop and go, I think our goal then also is setting down our agenda. Because we always have that sort of clouding kind of what we're going to do, and our time is so valuable. I got 5 minutes for this interaction. How do we practice things like that of just truly listening?
Awesome.
And I think that becomes the strategy. Then, if we can listen, if we can stop, our brains are going to be better. We're going to have higher level thinking. We're going to be more creative. We're going to have new ways of thinking about it. There's a great quote by Wayne Dwyer, I think it was, about, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Yeah.
And so it's not about getting that solution, but it's it's a process thing.
Yeah.
So much more than that.
Awesome. So probably too big of a question to end on, but I want to give you a little bit, several minutes of a runway to look at this, because, I think this is maybe the question of our time is we're coming off 13 months of maybe the most difficult leadership challenge in my lifetime, and now I've been around for a while. I'm pushing, going into the 50 is the next road mark coming up. So when I look at the last 13 months, and I also think I'm trying to put on leaders' radar. Just because you get a vaccine doesn't mean the vaccine cures all the trauma, the burnout, and stress of the last 13 months as well. I've been yelling at some folks now for decades, and to think, oh, we'll go back to new normal and all the trauma will disappear that the staff have been through, much less what the people we serve have been through. And I don't keep as well abreast of the politics up north as I probably should, but also in the States, we've had our biggest civil rights movement. It's boiling up to the top again. Not sure if you've seen anything about our politics, but it's been a mess. Again, all this bigger than I've ever seen in my lifetime. All this is maybe walking back into an in-person setting at some point. So as the too big to be the ending question, but to give you a runway to answer it as well, if you were to say, hey, leaders of trauma-informed or people aspiring to be trauma-informed workplaces, what are some things to really focus on as we kind of transition out of this traumatic piece of our collective history into some sort of different normal? It's going to, the world's changed forever. We just don't know kind of what ways. What are some of with your expertise, your experience, you internally as an organization working on this yourself, what are some of the few things you would like leaders to be thinking about during what I think is going to be as challenging, if not more challenging time as we try to get back to health and wellness?
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, here, everybody's listening. This is going to be the answer right here. This is going to solve all the problems.
Vitamin D supplements. We all just need vitamin D supplements.
Yeah, just vitamin B. There you go. Vitamin D.
Yes.
I've got a company. This is where it is. Go get it all. No. Well, I hate to start this answer with the same one as the last one, but yeah, no, this is a mountain, right? As we all know. And I mean, I personally don't think we've climbed the top yet. I think there's still that need that we find our stabilizing forces, strategies, process to get through, so that when we are moving to that next piece, that we can be as best we can be then. And I'm a social worker. I'm not a neuroscientist or anything there, but I know for myself and what I've read and heard around just the unpredictability, reality, the unpredictability of stress that we all are continuing to be on. We don't know what's going to happen next. And so that's I think a blanket statement that we can say for everybody. Even if you think you know, you don't, okay? But I think even within that, so as leaders, who work with employees, who work with clients that are all operating under this cloud, what can you do to be that guide? Like, I think we need leaders, our leaders' roles, to be the visionaries, to set the direction, to provide the tools for employees to do their job. Those are all essential. And so part of that is, I think, creating that environment, that emotional environment where we communicate completely clearly. We have straight talk. We're not going to sugarcoat things. This is hard. But what can we do to say this is at least where we know? Like when we were as an organization early on in March, I mean, we went from we lost 90% of our employment, of our clients and work in the beginning of the pandemic. So we really were scared we might not actually be around. Yeah. So we had viability questions that we might not exist, like existential questions like that. So, I mean, we want to offer some hope, but we want to be clear about this is where we're at every step of the way. This is what our financials are. This is what we're doing to offer a path through that we think it's going to be successful. We have certain people on the bus that this is your role. Maybe you're going to go to halftime. This is why we are committed to bringing you back. So I think that trust that we're baking into every step of the way, that we have your best interest in heart. We want you part of the team. We had to lay off a couple people, and we're like, okay, you're laid off. You are valuable. We see you as part of the team. We see a way out, and this is how we think it's going to look. So anything that we can do, I think, as leaders, to offer markers, to offer benchmarks. I think that works with our brain function around needing things to lodge. I mean, my reading now too, it's just that brain fog and fraying and memory loss because I'm at home every day. I don't have that up and down and novelty to hang things on.
Right.
And so what can we do? What can our public health people do to say, well, there is hope. The vaccine's growing.
Yeah.
This is what we see us looking like. And so I think it's not gonna take away stress, right? Yeah. I mean, I compare this sometimes to running a marathon without any training, right? We're mile 18, but we didn't train. And so what happens if you force yourself through, a pursuit like that without training? Well, you get injured. Right. And you crash. And so I think speaking plain, like we will have fatigue. We will have burnout. Our bodies are amazingly resilient when we can kind of see things where we are, when we can enhance our strengths. And so I think we need to continue to provide those markers, to acknowledge, to validate that's very real, that burnout, the fatigue. But what are we going to do to express that hope, the trust that we are in this? I mean, and there will be a change, and when we get there, then we're going to have to reevaluate. But hopefully we can do. I mean, it comes down so much to the basics. I think we're sleeping. Yeah. We have social engagement. We're eating. Like we're going down to those things to get through those final miles, and then when we're done, and then we're in that newness. Then we continue to say, okay, this is where we're at, and we communicate clearly on that. So yeah, there isn't a magic bullet, unfortunately. Yeah. But I think there are things within our control. Awesome. That we can get us through. And I think we got to find out those things that we can have agency over and control. And as organizations, what those are. So don't lose sight of those as you communicate with your employees. So.
Great. Well, leave it to me to take a book you can read in 30 minutes and only get about 25% of the way through. But this has been a real, I love this topic. I love the work that you're doing. So I want to extend, I think I even extended this before we even started talking because I was afraid of myself and that I would do this. I would love to have you back to go through some of these other principles because I think this is so important right now, both where we're at with the trauma-informed movement is, now we got Oprah talking about this, trauma is out there in a way it wasn't even 5 years ago. And you looking at this from this workplace management, leadership perspective, structural perspective of how we create these environments for the delivery of these services, I think it's just going to become more and more important as we talk more and more about trauma. Like I said, Oprah's got a few million more Twitter followers than I do, and probably somebody tweeting for her, which I really need to get more than my 30 followers or whatever I have. So,
well, great. I'll have to send Oprah a book and send her a note too.
Yeah, I think we're all sending Oprah all of our books. I imagine, I just kind of like to picture whatever her mailbox is like how many of our books are at her front door. But yeah, so I just want to give you a few minutes. And obviously we will put a lot of traumainformedlens.org in the show notes, all these links and everything for folks to learn more about your work. But I just like, if people are looking for more, how can they just sort of reach out to you? Why would they reach out to you besides looking for a copy of your great book?
Well, awesome. Yeah, I mean, we're actually, I think we're Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute, CTRI. We developed very much as a training company, but I think we've grown to be more of an institute that provides resources. And part of that mission that we have is being accessible and being trusted. And so, I mean, on our website, we have a ton of free resources as well, too. So, I mean, we talk about the trauma-informed approach. I mean, when I work with organizations and individuals, so much what comes out is, there's some good things there that we're doing a lot of that, but there's this one area that we're weak. And unfortunately, where I hear that more and more is that personal, is that wellness piece. And so what we've then listened, and on our free resources, we have lots of webinars, handouts on, working within COVID-19, personal wellness, mental health challenges within COVID-19. So just an hour, one click of a button, you get an hour-long lunch and learn webinar that I say, watch individually, but watch with somebody, talk about it, bring it to life in your words. And I think that's where it'll have a higher sticky power too. So I'll mention that, our free resources. We have an assessment there. We also have a packet that we can send out. It's so nice to have something you can kind of work through. And there's And this is accessible, as I say too. There's a facilitator's guide that can be used with it. So yeah, so I mean, and just fundamentally engaging, not being scared of talking about trauma, of thinking about it, of offering that out there. So yeah, we do a lot of training. We do actually a trauma-informed leadership course, a trauma-informed workplaces course, trauma-informed care, which is more in client care. So yeah, we try and make it accessible to sort of what's your lens on what's important to you. So yeah, we can be very adaptable in those ways when we come to your site.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, my friend, thank you very much. Again, the book is, let me make sure just say the title one more time so I don't screw it up.
A Little Book About Trauma-Informed Workplaces.
Perfect. And where could people find that? Is that on, where could they get that?
I mean, the best place is on our site. I think we have it on Amazon US. I should know all the other places, but if you look up CTRI and Trauma Informed, you'll find it there under our products. And we have a number of other books on culture question and the ordinary leader, counseling books. But yeah, on our site and Amazon US, I think we're having some issues with Amazon Canada. Yeah.
Amazon's the great answer. So pick it up. It is great. It's incredibly affordable on the website.
$5.
Yes, it is. Well, it's many times worth the price, and obviously I've gone through it. I didn't even get this conversation past, I think, the third principle. So Nathan, I hope to have you back. This was a great conversation, and I think so incredibly timely as well. So thanks for your work. Again, we will put all this information, traumainformedlens.org, in the show notes, and we'll see everybody next week. Nathan, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Matt, too. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.